Welcome to the Candid Comms podcast. If you're looking for practical and inspirational ideas to help you thrive in internal communication, you're in the right place. I'm your host, international communication consultant, trainer and mentor, Rachel Miller. Through this podcast, I'll share my experience with you so you can increase your skills, knowledge and confidence on all things internal communication related. Welcome to the show. On today's episode, I'm really excited to introduce the very first guest to the Candid Comms podcast. And when I was thinking about who I wanted to join me in conversation to talk about all things internal comms related, the number one name on my list was Matt Batten. I'm going to hand you over to Matt to introduce himself. Matt, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much. The first guest. This is also exciting and slightly feeling the pressure right now as well.
Don't feel the pressure.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm Matt Batten. I work for the Church in Wales in the Diocese of Llandaff, and I'm the Director of Communication and Engagement. And I've been there for it's coming up to 2 years, which I can't. I know, because I remember messaging you saying, I've seen this job come up.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to go for it. And you were like, you really have to. You really worked hard to get to this point. So 2 years, I just can't believe it.
Goodness. And what a time to be working in comms in the church when everything has changed, right? One of the reasons I really wanted to get you onto the show is because I know it's called Candid Comms because I think having an honest and open conversation about communication is so important. And particularly I'm fascinated by the work that you've been doing and the changes that you've seen over the last year or so. I wonder whether you can talk to us about maybe what your role is day to day and then maybe how it's shifted as a result of 2020.
Yeah, and it really has shifted an awful lot. I think before, if we were recording this, say 2 years ago, at church comms, nobody was really that interested in. It was probably just press releases and a little bit of social media. But when I joined 2 years ago, it was at a time when the diocese was going through a massive change. And you realise that going to church is not the top of everyone's priorities anymore. You realise you really, really need to do something quite radical. So we had a new bishop, Bishop June. She came in working with us to develop a vision. And that vision was all about a different way, a fresh way of communicating and engaging. She knew she didn't want a press secretary. What she wanted was someone who does engagement. So with my background in theology, plus my sort of enthusiasm for comms and experience in that field, I was brought in then to lead the communication and engagement. What I find interesting looking back, though, is as much as digital was included in the job description, the reality when I joined was that this was not a culture that was up for digital.
That's interesting. Why? What was the culture like?
Oh, the culture was print. The culture was newsletters in the pews in the church, and the Croeso magazine, which is our quarterly magazine that would go out, which would have all the news in. And we had a website. We put some stuff on the website, as you do, and we had social media, which we would just retweet other people's content, and Facebook, which was just posted. Yeah.
So not actually doing original content on Twitter, just sharing, amplifying other voices.
Yeah, okay. It was an echo chamber for everyone else. So why would you follow us?
Indeed.
Because we're not having a conversation with you. Actually, great. We'll retweet you, but after a while, you might as well go and follow that other channel than us. We're not talking to you. We're not talking to the people who go to our church.
So when you saw that, did you go, wow, I want to get stuck in here and
100%. Yeah. And that's, in my naivety, that's what I thought was what they wanted me for the get-go. And what I discovered was, while I'm embracing digital and social and videos and, really looking through my toolkit of things that we use as communicators to tell our story, what I realized was there was a massive nervousness about digital. And a lot of that came down to but our people aren't on social media. They don't do digital. They're a lot older. So you need to draw back from all the social media that you're doing. And a lot of that came down to the age range of people who go to church who are older. But my argument is, but the NHS know that they can't reach the older demographic through social, but they know they can reach the carers, the mothers, the fathers, the cousins, the daughters. They target them with that information. Why don't we do the same? So, yes, I'm not saying we get rid of print. So what I did was say, I'm going to bring digital up to the same level as print in year 1. That's what I'm going to do. Nothing
Love
scary.
it. Yep.
Nothing scary. Don't worry about that I'm usurping our traditional channels. I'm not here to stamp all over your newsletters. I am here to bring digital up to the same level and give it the same respect. Then when everyone's comfortable, you start doing a little bit more, and print then perhaps isn't the primary channel, but it's unique channel. Then COVID comes along. So now suddenly my push on digital, I'm pushing an open door. Whereas before I wasn't. COVID advanced our digital culture tremendously.
Could you quantify that? Could you, by a number of months, by a number of years? Could you possibly gauge that, do you think?
Yeah, because I had a strategy. So I had a 3-year strategy of what I was going to achieve in those 3 years. The first year was sorting out our channels, being clear on our audience, all the basics that we do as internal comms professionals, knowing who we're targeting and looking at the data and making those decisions. Then year 2 was starting to be a little bit more creative with how we tell our story. Year 3 was starting then to look at how do we upskill our priests, our volunteers, our office team, so that we're not the ones doing all the comms. We're enabling more of our people, and we just curate it. So basically, I had to scrap about 18 months of strategy out of the window and do it within 8 days. because it's super. But Rachel, think about when lockdown happened originally. It was a couple of days before Holy Week. Now, you don't have to be a Christian to know that there are 2 major festivals in the church calendar. That's going to be Holy Week and Easter, and it's going to be Christmas. The fact that we then had to do digital and go online within 8 days of Holy Week was a massive challenge. And at the same time, the new website was launching because we had to advance that as well to host all that we needed to do. Holy Week in the church is a busy time. Add COVID and the anxiety and the mourning that was difficult for people, because it's not just a building. The emotion that is tied up to going to church is quite incredible. For some people who are of the older generation, that is their only contact that they will have that week. How do you replicate that online?
Oh, you give me goosebumps, Matt.
But it's true, and that's
it's got an emotional place, isn't it? It's an emotional connection to. I think you don't have to be a Christian to be able to. I guess, by any denomination, if you think about your place of worship, it's a community. It's your place where you go, where maybe you feel a sense of belonging, and where you see your friends and you see the people who matter. And we were talking just before we started recording about. We miss the hugs. I miss the hugs. I miss seeing people in person and giving them big bear hugs. It's that physical contact and connection, isn't it? And particularly through the lens of Holy Week. You're right. That's when we come together.
It really is. I mean, those 2 seasons are when traditionally more and more people will go to church. Some for the first time. Others just haven't got into the habit for a long time, but feel a call to go into church. So it's more than, my role is more than just communicating a story or a fact. It is very much about communicating an emotion, a very spiritual emotion for some community of friends, so that was a challenge. And the fear, I think, from a lot of people in the decision-making body of the church is, it's not the same as in person. And I'm like, no, it's not. It isn't. Let's be honest. It's not going to be the same, but it can be different, and it's not going to be forever. So why don't we tell their story of what this means to them? And that was my approach with comms through COVID, was essentially find the voices of the people this is impacting and tell their story. And it's been quite a challenge to reach an audience, but we're seeing our audience.
That's a massive understatement there. I feel like you're being so humble. Cards on table, Matt.
Okay, cards on the
candid. Okay, we're being candid.
Okay.
How difficult has it been, really?
Oh, incredibly difficult. I'll be honest with you. That first year, I worked all the hours, and I don't think you go into a job where you care so much about what you're doing without being willing, during a time of crisis, to put a bit of self-sacrifice behind it. Because I was hearing those stories. I was hearing about priests who their whole life is doing church on a Sunday and every morning. That's just been ripped from them. And now we're saying, oh, wouldn't it be good if you went online? We've never asked that of them before. So, I would I spend most of my time coaching people over the phone how to set up your mobile phone. The first 3 weeks I was like, don't even worry right now about having all the right tech. Just be comfortable that you're live streaming, and it could just be your face right now and you're talking to your audience. Build on that over time. And some of it is emotional, but some of the things is also really funny. Like Father Andrew live streaming from his church a Eucharist service, and the camera falls over. Or Bishop June when she's saying a prayer and the dog comes running and barking past her. And we tell the funny stories of behind the scenes because we've all been there.
Love it. That's so applicable for in-house internal communicators in any role. I think getting our leaders comfortable being uncomfortable, showing up on camera, doing things that they've never had to do before, and particularly to do by themselves, because we normally swoop in with the kit, right? We set it up and then we point and shoot. And actually had to get our leaders to build up their own skills and capabilities in terms of showing up, being visible, being on camera, when that might not be comfortable for them and it might not be what they're used to. So thinking about your target audience, as being congregations, what's the impact been to have that visible leadership and have that shift to digital? What's it meant for your people?
The impact of seeing Bishop June so accessible has been quite wonderful to see, and I can see that from the comments that we get on Facebook and Twitter, and the emails that she receives and the letters she receives as well. Nice. What I did with Bishop June was not overuse her, because it's so easy with your leaders, isn't it, just to plonk them in front of a camera for every single message and think that's what everyone wants to hear.
So true.
Yeah, and I don't. I'm very careful with what I say I think we need to do. With Bishop June, she's got a very... I understand her style now, because I spent a lot of time in my first couple of months meeting with her every month, just literally listening to what moves her, what she's passionate about. So I know then when something comes up, I can say, this is really right for you. A good example of that would be for a domestic violence campaign we ran last year. I did not know the history of Bishop June at all. This is a great example as well of how a leader has become comfortable. Before, she didn't do any mobile phone video stuff. I came in, I did it. This last couple of months, she's been doing it herself. She's bought a Rode mic. She's Dropboxing stuff at me at all hours. I'm like, I can't keep up. You're like a video machine, Bishop. Like, slow down. Come on now. But she did this story, right, of her experience of domestic violence as a child and the impact of her father and on her mother and herself. She did it sat on her stairs, like leaning into the camera, telling a story. I mean, that's authentic comms right there.
Yeah. You can't fake that, can you?
You cannot fake it.
You feel the difference, don't you, when you're someone who makes you want to listen, and it makes you, because it's not scripted and polished and perfect, it's raw, isn't it? I think some of the best leadership communication is that when it's so raw, and that's obviously an incredibly tough subject as well.
A really tough subject, and tough for someone in her position to share her story publicly, because it goes out on our channels, but it gets picked up by, the church in Wales and other channels who are hearing that story, and suddenly your comms is relatable. Suddenly you're more than just going to church on a Sunday. You're about, I understand this is an issue here in the society and I want to do something about it. It's very easy for churches to see social media as marketing tools, to just put their message out and say, come to church. Or why don't you tell the story of the people who go to church instead?
Because peer to peer, isn't it? Right?
It totally is, and this is internal comms, so people might be wondering, why am I talking about congregation? Isn't that public? But it's not, because think of them as your advocates. For me, my external comms are the people who perhaps are not coming into church or on the fringes of church, but my internal comms are the ones who go to church. They're the ones who are volunteers. There are office staff. There are clergy. They're the ones who are going to take this message and share it with their friends and family and their communities. And so to see Bishop June tell that story and have people share that, suddenly church is opened up to an external audience on an issue that's not exclusively about your core business.
That's so poignant, isn't it?
It's beautiful, when you tell a story like that.
Yeah, you can't beat hearing a leader in their own words. I think, we'd like to think that we're all great writers when working in internal comms, and lots of us are ex-journalists and we've, been brought up in the profession as writers. But actually, there are times where you need to trust your leaders to give them the confidence, I think, that their words are enough and their words are right. And sometimes it's not for us to tell them what to say. I think probably most times it's not for us to tell them what to say. We can give them guidance and talking points, or, I'm a fan of the bullet points. You're giving that, flexibility within boundaries. And the boundary is particularly for change communication, where you're giving them a bit of a steer, but actually where the richness and variety of good, effective internal comms happens for me is that, and we overuse the word authentic, I think, in internal comms. I think it's got to the point where we want everything to be authentic. And, if it's not, everyone knows the difference. Yeah. But I think it's just setting your leaders up for success and giving them the opportunity to be themselves and be human and be relatable. Maybe relatable rather than authentic is what we need.
I think you're right. And I think it's very easy, particularly in hierarchical organizations. So take the fact away that she's a bishop, because everyone's probably got their own version of what a bishop is like. Strip away all of that and just think of it in terms of a hierarchical organization. It takes an awful lot of courage to put yourself out there, because you've then got to go into meetings and not be the vulnerable person that perhaps you've seen on a video. You've still got to deliver a tough message. But I think that then becomes easier when you've seen your leader as not being put up on a pedestal. You've put them in they're just like you and me kind of situation.
It's beyond the robes, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, that's a good one. Can I nick that one? It's Beyond the Robes. Okay, I'm having that. Well, I tell you what, that might be the name of my autobiography, Matt Batten, Beyond the Robes.
Oh, amazing.
I'd have to be ordained before that one works, but I'm not sure that's ever going to happen.
I think, you never know. Never say never.
Never say never.
I think that the key bit for me when I'm thinking about leaders, it's beyond the job title. It's not them as CEO or managing director or president, whatever they are. It's about beyond what their business card says or email signature nowadays. It's that same mindset, right? Of how can we shine a light on them as the person.
And I wouldn't want any leader to come across as being untouchable. They're so hierarchical, or people are perceiving them to be untouchable, unable to get to them with a message or to have a conversation with them, because I think that's really old-fashioned sort of leadership style, isn't it? If you've put them and you've created barriers, And I think
the corner office, isn't it? It's the kind of the shiny ivory tower corner office syndrome, rather than sleeves up on the front line. Mucking in with the troops.
Exactly.
I know what I prefer.
Totally. It's about respect as well, isn't it? If you see someone who gets what your challenges are, then you're more likely to respond with those extra favors, or you're going to go that bit further to do a piece of work because you see something in them that you respond well to. And I think as communicators, it's very much about finding the sweet spot of your leadership team and saying, I'm going to use you for this one, but I'm not going to use the chief exec, for example, because that's not going to work as well. And that's where I am, I think, with some of my comms. It's not always going to be the bishop. It doesn't always need to be.
Well, I think what you said right at the start around how you went into the job and spent time listening and learning and getting to know the leaders, I think is so relatable for internal communicators and how we need to work with leaders. In a previous episode, I focused on how to work successfully with leaders. And I think everything you've said there is so important about getting to know their communication style and their preference. So you know when to, I say use always feels like a wrong word to use, but it's kind of, we know when to pull on them in terms of this is appropriate for you, for these type of employees, or you know what, it doesn't always have to be you. It can be a good effective leadership in an organization for me is where your CEO or the bishop in your case is seen to kind of hand down and trust that next layer down. That's often who people relate with, because that person in the very highest rank feels untouchable and they feel too senior and therefore not as relatable as the immediate local management.
Exactly.
If you want to learn more about internal communication, I have a special offer for you. Because you're a listener of the Candid Comms podcast, you can save 10% off my range of online masterclasses. Simply use the code Candid Comms at the checkout to remove 10% from the listed price. I offer a range of courses, and these are your courses done at your pace. You have 12 months access from when you enrol in a course, and there's a range of options to choose from in terms of topics. See the show notes for the full information, and I hope to see you inside an online masterclass very soon. Oh, I could talk to you all day, Matt. I've got some questions for you. I'm going to ask you. That's all right. So I would love to ask you a key piece of learning that has stayed with you or shaped the way you communicate.
The one thing that resonates with me that my very first coach ever said to me, she said to me, Matthew, why would you go into a meeting and not know who your allies are? That piece of advice is the best thing I have ever heard. And I remember the situation because I had to present, it was my first senior role. So I had to present a paper about customer experience to the executive team of the organization I was there. And I was really nervous. Right? Never been in, it's the lion's den kind of stuff. Never ever been that. It's always at that level of my career, I was always one of the team. Good old having us all have a good time. So I thought I need a coach. I said to her, look, I got to present, and I knew she was going to be there as well. And she goes, all right, so who's your allies? And I was like, I don't know. And she was like, oh, there you go. Why would you go in cold to that meeting and not know what other people are thinking? And I was like, well, how do you find that out? And she said, well, have you phoned anyone up? Have you phoned any of those leaders, any of those directors up and said, I'm presenting a paper. Can I run it by you? Because I've never done this before. And I was like, no. And she's like, well, there you go. And I was like, what, that easy? And she was like, of course. She goes, they're human. She said, it would be a really bad person who says, no, I'm going to let you suffer. And she goes, and if they do, you don't want anything to do with them. I was like, oh, right, okay. So
that's great advice. I love that.
Isn't it great advice? So that's what I do now. Every time I go into a meeting, I think, right, who's my allies? And if I don't know, then I'm going to talk to them just to find out what's on their mind. Great.
Okay, I have a question for you on measurement.
Woohoo.
We love a measurement question. How do you approach measurement, or what insights can you share about measuring the outcomes? And I'm a big fan of outcomes, not outputs in comms.
Yes.
How do you do that in reality?
Oh, measurement. Honestly, I remember, I think, having this conversation with you at a conference and saying, do you know what? Everyone talks about measurement in internal comms, but it feels like the scariest thing in the world until you just start measuring. And then it's not, because it's not scary. It's just data that tells you the answer to your problems. Measurement is hugely important for what I do, because I communicate other people's projects, campaigns, etc. So an example for me is every 3 months we do social media reports and also website reports. So I know who's hitting what targets. What I've noticed with a team who are making a lot of videos, for example, they're putting a lot of effort into it, and the drop off is 30 seconds. Oof. And I'm like, I need to have a conversation with you about it, because you're wasting your time, actually, and it could be done better. So for me, I use measurement to be able to make better decisions. And I use measurement to improve the way I communicate. And I use measurements to suggest different ways of doing things, even on my own work. It's a really easy thing to do is to point your camera and film. But if that's not working for your audience, look at your data. And then I realize, my intro of 20 seconds might have been the best thing I have ever created, but then everyone's switching off because it's too long. like drop the intro, get straight to your point, and then that's the level of success measurement can have. I get a lot of people in the church world and where I work who don't understand necessarily what outcomes and outputs are. So I've had to be really quite strict when someone will say to me, just done this amazing video, and then present how great it was and tell everyone how great it was. And I'm like, but what was the outcome? What was the outcome of that particular piece of work? It becomes natural, I think, for internal comms. The more you do measurement, the more you know it's not criticism. You've got your data to help someone be a better communicator. You've got your data to help your company, your organization, to make better decisions. It's not anything to fear. If something's not working, that's probably not your fault, because you didn't know why at the outset this wasn't going to work.
I love that. That's a peach of a quote for me, that it's not criticism. I think there is a fear of measuring. It's knowing what to measure, knowing how to measure, knowing why we're measuring, and then what happens if it turns up that actually people don't like our channels, and then there is that sense of criticism. I think that mindset is so important. I think you've nailed that. And you're right. I think it's the language of measurement and making sure that it makes sense to our people.
I'm really upfront with it. Even if some stats don't look good for something me and the team have produced, I'm all right with that. Because how can I go and knock on someone's door and say, this video didn't work, if I don't look at it myself and say, actually, that wasn't the best piece of work you've ever delivered. It's all right. You can do something better next time with the data.
Love it. What does Candid Comms mean to you?
Oh, gosh, Candid Comms. Do you know, I think for me, it means being brave with the feedback you give somebody. It means listening to your audience, listening to what they need, not what you think your boss thinks they need, and having a conversation with them about the reality of a situation. So COVID, for example, and people not being in the same office, I've really noticed the tempers get a bit frayed. When you're just bouncing emails and team messages. And as great as digital communications have been for us internally, it still presents a challenge as well for team dynamic. And I really noticed at the end of last year, the team wasn't in a happy place. Nobody was in a happy place. And there was a lot of blame, I think, going on. There was a lot of emails that were slightly, you just read into it and you're like, someone's not okay here. And so start having conversations with people about what's going on and, why are things the way they are. So I went to my boss and I said, I'm really noticing the team are feeling a bit down, that we're coming to the end of the year. And I think this has gone on long enough and we need now to come back as a team because we've been under pressure a lot. And so I presented that to my boss, who was also under a lot of pressure as well. So it's, you just think, I'm adding to his burden. But going and having a candid conversation to say, this is what's happening. The impact of some of the decisions that are being made. This is the impact and this is the reality. But instead of just bringing that to his doorstep, it's really important, if you can have a candid conversation, to also suggest a candid solution as well. And, that was as easy as, why don't we just go in, organize a meeting, organize a team event, and just say, look, you're under pressure, so humble yourself in front of them and say, look, I'm under pressure, you're under pressure, how can we work together and help each other? And that's the level of candid conversation I think is important to me. Not just ignoring something when you see trouble is brewing, not leaving it to the absolute crunch point, but going in when you get in a sense that something's wrong and just having an honest conversation with your leader and saying, I think we need to do something about this, even if it's not going to be what they want to hear.
Can I ask you about the impact of that? So what was the result of doing that with the team?
Do you know what? Normally we would have gone out for like Christmas do, etc. And then, I was getting a sense that everyone was really fed up of being online, to be honest. So we went to the DBF and said, can we just buy everyone, instead of the money that would go for a night out, can we just buy him a present?
What does DBF stand for?
Oh gosh, I'm doing that awful thing. Diocesan Board of Finance.
Awesome, thank you.
Gosh, I'm glad you picked up on that. So they bought everyone in the office a present, and a lovely, lovely message from the bishop and from the chair to say, you have worked extremely hard this year. We've also introduced different ways of doing team meetings now, a mixture of just dropping in and having a chat, but also doing some of the business stuff as well. We're looking at the way those meetings they're not working. So what can we do now to make them work? And it's just a bit of, maybe we're just pushing business all the time. Why don't we just have a coffee? Last week, for the first time, I think, since lockdown, we all just got together and had a coffee.
What did that feel like?
A relief. Bizarrely, a relief, going into a meeting and not have to perform. With not going and having something on the agenda that you're leading and just going in and chatting to people was a relief. And it was lovely. And we had a laugh. And I thought, gosh, in between the business focus and the deliverables are a group of people who get on really well. Can't forget that. And I think, unfortunately, we did. Towards the end of the year.
Good on you for having that candid conversation, because it led to a positive one, right?
Definitely. Yeah.
So my final question for you, Matt, is what one piece of advice can you pass on to other internal comms people? I mean, you've given us a whole episode worth, so I'm very, very grateful to you for that. But what one piece of advice would you like people to take away?
I think the one piece of advice I would give would be to immerse yourself in the culture of the organization you work for. You need to understand the language. You need to understand the positives where people are anxious about things. You need to know what keeps your leaders awake at night. You need to know your core mission and what you can not deviate from. For me, the core mission is at the heart of everything that we do. And that is by spending 6 months of not making any major decisions in my job, but listen to what is it we want to achieve and summing it up. But you can only do that by being immersed in your organization. And one of the simple things I did, which is not everyone's cup of tea, surprisingly, the church uses Facebook a lot. So within the first week, I must have had every friend request from a cleric that I could imagine. And I was a little bit like, oh, do I really want them seeing me on a night out, being tagged in photos? I'm not sure I do. But I created a separate channel and was like, they need to see personal Matt. They don't need to see me on a night out, but they need to see me on Facebook, sharing a little bit about my life, because I'm also one of them. I go to church as well, and I'm interested in all this sort of thing. But I did that because I wanted to immerse myself in the culture. I wanted to see what life was like as a cleric. I just travelled around churches, meetings, church halls at 7 p.m, because that's when all church meetings happen.
They always have good biscuits as well, though.
Oh my goodness, honestly.
A biscuit tour, Matt, let's be honest. That's what you're really
It's
doing.
literally coffee and biscuits. If you ever in the church, you just know, don't go to a meeting without a pack of biscuits. They will be your best friend. So immerse yourself in the culture and awesome. be one of them. You're going to win a lot of favors that way.
Brilliant. Matt, thank you so much for your candor today, for all of your advice and guidance that you've shared. It's been super to have you on. Where can people find you online if they want to connect with you?
I'm a heavy Twitter user, so I'm on Comms Guy Matt with 2 T's. So feel free to follow me on there. I do tweet a lot about comms, a lot about internal comms. It's my favourite subject, and a side order of church comms as well. So come along.
Marvellous. Well, Matt, thank you so much. And all of the notes from this show can be found at allthingsic.com/podcast. And Matt, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for tuning in to this week's episode. Do find me online at All Things IC and let me know what you thought of today's episode. And remember, what happens inside is reflected outside. See you again soon.